60, excited and rich. No, this is not a Lonely Hearts ad. This is an increasing part of the population thanks to the government's Simple Super legislation. Or at least that's the impression we get. No one denies Simple Super is a step in the right direction for increasing savings. But in practice, for the tax office and for funds, is it super simple?
I think it's great. Again, when I'm out there talking to members about what superannuation means, it is actually making it simpler. Especially the concept of once you're over 60, you're going to get it all tax-free.
Any move to cut tax at any point in the superannuation cycle is a good thing.
I think it's very positive. I mean, the industry has been growing extremely rapidly. It's a very complex industry. There's a lot of confusion out there if we go down to member level, and anything that simplifies that is just fantastic news.
Isn't it great? We've got more change in superannuation. Wonderful. Simplification or not? That's the question, and that's something I'd like to address today. When I was asked last year after the budget was announced, is it a good thing? I said absolutely yes. And for that, I probably should apologise, because when you look a little bit into the depth of the legislation and who it affects and how, it is good for some people. It is not good for the industry. It creates a lot of problems going forward, which I'll talk about today. For the average consumer, there is no difference. If you're rich, you are very lucky. The government has just handed you a lot of money, but that doesn't help the average consumer, which is what most funds here represent. So the rich just got richer. And you've got to ask the question, where is the equity in that? By eliminating taxes on retirement benefits. There is no scaled tax system. There is no flat tax, just no tax. That's equitable, not. Some of the impact, the immediate impact and obvious impact of the legislation is there will be a deferral of retirement to age 60, a reduction in the drawdown rates after the age of 60. Across the board, we should see an increase in the level of voluntary savings, which is a good thing for superannuation and for Australians. And obviously there will be accelerated voluntary savings for those over the age of 50. But as someone quite pointedly just pointed out, the high net worth individuals get to contribute anything up to $1 million prior to 30th June. That is just a ridiculous sum of money. So to make some blindingly obvious predictions, the real asset growth in the superannuation system will accelerate from here on in. So you, as funds, will have to deal with more money and quicker inflows. The tax file number legislation will cost administrators more than the surcharge debacle. It has the potential to cost you, as funds and as executives, and ultimately the members, a lot of money. Administration fees will rise by over 50% in the next 5 years. That is a key thing that you need to consider in your business planning. You have screwed down administrators for a long time. It is time to reanalyse that relationship with your administrators because their costs must go up. Your investment research costs will rise significantly over the next 5 years. I'll go into that shortly. The other prediction, that your expenditure pie, so in other words, the money that you allocate to your various service suppliers, needs to shift in the very short term to better reward those people that you need to work closely with. Advice, we can have this debate for another decade. Commissions will still be with us in 5 years' time. The last one, prediction, these changes haven't finished. The benefits given by the government to the wealthy, I don't think have been A, well thought out, or B, costed well. There are some significant numbers involved in this, and that will impact on the government in power in 2016. Let's have a look at some specifics of the effect of these tax changes going forward. Now we have our wonderfully wealthy people, and bear in mind, you may not think there's many funds out there with these account balances in them. You would be wrong. If you look at the DIY market out there, it is as big as, if not larger, than the industry fund movement. If you had a $2 million account balance right now, effective from 1 July, the benefit of these tax changes in present value terms is $1.1 million. The aggregate tax savings over the life of your pension, assuming you're a 60-year-old, is $2.5 million. Your benefit, your net cash has just increased by 55%. Now let's look at Joe average. $100,000. We know at the moment that the average benefit payment out of the system is less than $100,000. Now true, with time, benefits will increase and compound up, but at the moment, $100,000, there is no change. On $200,000, which is more than double the current benefit payment average, there's still no change. The only benefit that flows through to members, average consumers, is where your benefit reaches about $280,000. There is no equity in that process, and this whole system needs to be reviewed. I would much rather see a scaled tax system so that the wealthy pay their fair share of tax on their superannuation benefit, on their retirement benefit. We need to encourage superannuation at the bottom end, not at the top end. And I think in this case the government has got it completely wrong. Let's talk about tax file numbers. We've got 3 months till implementation. There's still no firm regulations in place. When the ATO campaign comes out and starts trying to tell lower and middle class income earners that they need to submit their tax file numbers, is it going to work? I don't think so. It will have some impact, but obviously not enough. The response rates on all of these sort of things are very low. And really, if you look at the whole process, who is this going to help? The government. They want money up front. They want you to take 48.5% of contributions out where no TFN is evident. Now, in principle, that sounds quite easy, but from an administrative point of view, it is very difficult. Why? Because it needs to be undone in the case of TFN suddenly appearing, and I'll go through the process. It's very easy to ignore what is required by an administrator. It is not that easy. Ask any of them. Let's look at an example where historically a member contributed $1,000 and 15% tax was taken out and remitted to the tax office. Now there's no TFN. So you take out 48.5% and remit that to the tax office. The member then finds this out and says, well, hang on, you've taken 48.5% of my contribution. They are not going to blame the tax office, they're going to blame you. And they're going to say, I want my tax back. Under the current environment, the administrator has 2 processes, contribution in, tax out. Under this new structure, it could be anything up to 5 processes or more, and those processes are actually more difficult, handling member calls, liaising with tax office, those sort of things, than simply taking tax out of a contribution. So from a cost point of view for an administrator, it could be anything up to 4 times the cost of just processing the normal contribution. The issue between employers providing tax file numbers, or there is discussion about the tax office actually providing tax file numbers back to the funds, has still not been resolved. Possibly one of the answers is, why wouldn't the tax office be happy to take 48.5% of a member's benefit at the end, when it's cashed out, a single transaction? To me, that makes a lot more sense. Either people exist and have a TFN, or they don't. In this case, it's a single transaction. You pay the tax office. Before the benefit's paid, you tell the member, you need to give me your TFN. If you don't, I will take half your benefit. Administration is getting harder, not easier. And administrators have been having problems since 1983, which is when the first changes came in for tax. And for years, you pushed and pushed and pushed them down on administration fees. Why? Because you had some choice. No longer. We've got 4 major administrators in the market at the moment that control just under 50% of the total membership base of the Australian superannuation system. And you need to pay them adequate respect, you need to pay them adequate money. Because when you don't pay a supplier reasonable amounts of money, they cut corners. And the corners that have been cut in this case are their IT spend. Think about what these administrators actually do. They are transactional organisations. They receipt contributions, they pay benefits, they record information. That is their core process. But for many years, particularly in the last 5 years, you've been going to them saying, I want, I want, I want. I want CRM systems. I want to be able to do this quicker. I want web-based. I want unit pricing. All those sort of things I want. And what has happened is administrators have not been spending enough money maintaining that core system. And they need to invest heavily in technology because technology equals efficiencies. And efficiencies will ultimately, for you, lead to lower cost. We have 4 major administrators at the moment, but for how long? It could well be that we go to 3 in the not too distant future. And ultimately, it could well be that there's a duopoly in the industry. Their real growth per member over the last decade has been negligible. Look at that compared to your asset-based suppliers, particularly investment managers, where their fees have gone up significantly, and you will see why there's a disparity in the way you are spending your money. So when your administrator comes knocking, don't push them away. Try and engage them and try and make sure that they will be there in 10 years' time providing you with sensational service, because service is a differentiator. Everyone's got differentiators at the moment, might be on fees, might be on investments, those sort of things. Everyone remembers the service experience. And it's probably something we don't want from a superannuation industry perspective, is to end up like the telecom industry. They're all the same. You've got 20 to 40 minute waiting periods on call centres. You do not want to end up in that route as an industry or as an individual fund to have a competitive advantage. So if we look at where your overall costs are going, it's interesting. Administration, dollar-based, insurance dollar-based, and so on. Who's the odd man out here? It would have to be investments with a percentage-based. Why have funds historically accepted, or the whole industry accepted, that percentage-based fees on investment management are fair and equitable? Why can't we question that? Why can't we look at a pay-for-performance model? At the moment, you pay them win, lose or draw. They are taking the biggest slice out of this $1 trillion industry. If you look at your costs as a percentage base, a 2 basis point reduction is the equivalent of providing you with another $10 per member per annum to spend on other things. If your fund's got an average account balance of $20,000, a $10 per member increase will be completely offset by a 5 basis point reduction in investment costs. If you're fortunate enough, and there's not many of you out here, to have an average of $50,000 average balance, to get $10 to spend per member more every year, you need only reduce your investment cost by 2 basis points. Where would that money go? I go back to my former point. Give some of that money to your administrator. Allocate more to your asset consultant or your investment team for new research. Why? What you need is someone that's working for you, not selling to you, working for you to go out and do appropriate research. And that research is going to get harder and harder and more expensive. And at the moment, your allocation of monies to that part of your investment management process is not enough. Seek to reward your investment managers for performance only. If they deliver on their promises, pay them handsomely. It's not an issue. If they constantly don't deliver, then they should be penalised. Let's talk about advice. Has anyone got the model right? No. Many of you have tried. I don't think any of you have got it right. And it's the legislation that is at fault, not you. The question is, what is advice? Why can't we find some middle ground to say intra-fund advice is totally separate from product advice, and to take away the rules that we have in place to say, let's allow intra-fund advice, arguably with little or no documentation. There are no conflicts of interest, particularly with the funds we're addressing here. There's no conflict of interest for one of your internal staff or planners to say to someone, co-cons, you're eligible for co-cons, let's go and get it sorted. The problem in that trying to make a carpet coverage of this industry is that anyone with a commission-based product, this wouldn't work. Because what will happen is that people will say, you should be put in another $10,000 in undeducted or concessional these days, contributions. If that $10,000 is then subject to a contribution fee, then there is a conflict of interest in that advice. If there's no commission involved, there cannot be a conflict of interest. So why won't commissions disappear? You know what? I think a lot of people have got this argument totally wrong. All we're talking about is removing the commission from these employer-sponsored commercial super funds. I don't think we'll ever get rid of commissions. It's a reality. So, and the biggest reason for that is obviously that the dealer groups or the institutions are scared of the power of their own advisors. Those institutions don't have the relationship. It's the person that sold that plan to the employer that has the relationship. So to try and bring all of those discussions together, obviously from your point of view as funds, you are going to see an increase in asset growth, which is a good thing. You will need to spend a lot more money on researching where that money is to go, particularly offshore. You need to find a home overseas for a lot of this money. You're not just going to throw it at any opportunity that comes along. It needs to be fully researched and risk analysed before you commit. And the thing is, you need to start that analysis now, not in 5 years' time. You need to increase your administration costs. You need to ensure that your partnership in that area will deliver sound and professional services to your member. They are your interface between your member and you. And the member's experience is the key to holding that member. You need to rebalance your costs, and we, as an industry, need to find a way of delivering professional advice. So what does this mean for funds? The obvious statement, which I haven't made till now, but is obvious, is you need to have a cradle-to-grave product range. You've just spent decades helping this person through to your ultimate goal and their ultimate goal, which is retirement, and then you cast them off. You say, thank you, you take your money and go and find a home for it. That's not good. Obviously, you'll have an opportunity to lower the age of connection with your membership, particularly as asset balances increase. A broader split between balances, this is simply the haves and the have-nots. So what you're going to see is a greater spread between your membership. There is a reinforcement, and a lot of this conference has been around member segmentation. It is critical, and you need to do it. Who's going to do it for you? Well, technically your administrator. How are they going to do it? They need more money. Greater opportunities for you as funds, absolutely. There's been a lot of discussion about mergers, but very little action. And I think some of you need to probably put your ego aside for a little while and say, am I acting in the best interests of members? And the key measure on that would be, do I have a competitive advantage in the market that I am in? What can the consumer expect? The average consumer can expect nothing. There is no benefit from these changes. For lower income earners, who are the ones that will be affected by TFNs, all they're going to get out of this is more aggro. For the high net wealth, yep, they can all go out and buy a pallet of moe. The consumer can expect improved levels of transparency. And the key ones there for me are simply that statements should have line items on them for everything. And finally, better engagement from funds. From that, you are all getting better at your education. It would be really good if basic financial knowledge was built into primary and obviously high schools. We are trying to create a value for membership in the Australian superannuation system. Forgetting everything else, as long as you create and you feel comfortable you've created value for your member, then you've done a good job.